Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of Fulgentius by Cesar Aira. No idea if I said that right. Now, this was a book that Evie put onto my radar and she actually ended up buying me the book, bless her. I was so touched that she did that, so thank you, Evie. I had it on my I have multiple bookshelves, and the one that I have in my room is the one where I have the books that I want to read in the next kind of couple of weeks, couple of months. And so I put that there because it's very short. It's a very, very small book. You can see here, it's pretty tiny. You can see all the tabs as well. I just thought that, you know, one day I'll want to pick up kind of a philosophical book. And I ended up doing that a couple of days ago, where I had just finished a book, a really chunky book, and I was like, I just want something smaller. And so I picked up Fulgentius. I read it in a day, less than a day, and I loved every single thing about it. And it's now put Cesar Aira kind of on my hit list of authors that I want to read more of because of how wonderful it was. And this is a book about the character Fulgentius. He is a kind of 67-year-old military leader, and he also is a kind of part-time playwright. And he writes this play. It's basically about his kind of adventures as a military leader, but also as a playwright, and seeing his play kind of come to fruition and kind of seeing people watching his play. I'm not going to say anything more beyond that because, you know, it's really about this man. It's really about this person's experiences and his philosophy and his values and his kind of perspective on life. Without further ado, I'm now going to jump into my review. I love the writing style. The writing style of this book is absolutely beautiful. It's very lyrical, but not in a wishy-washy way. I don't really like books that are too lyrical because they start to get to a point where it kind of loses my interest and doesn't hold my mind. But that was not the case in Fulgentius. I just think it was so beautifully written. It felt like it was written like a kind of historical fiction retelling. It actually reminded me a lot of Tom Holt, aka KJ Parker's writing. I feel like there's quite a lot of parallels in the way that Cesar tells the story to the way that KJ Parker tells the story that I just adored. I just loved it. And that brings me on to what I loved next, and that is the titled character of this book, Fulgentius. His musings on life, you know, he kind of laments materialism. He's bored with his life in Rome, which is ultimately why he becomes a military leader. You know, he has this kind of creative spark in him though. He's very kind of rational, but he has this creativity to him that I don't think you would typically assume a military general has, and I just loved it. I think that the thing that I really liked about Fulgentius' is kind of character is how when he talks about his military work and when he talks about his play, he talks about them in fundamentally different ways. The military side, like I said, is very rational, is very kind of ordered, and you know, kind of looks at it in a kind of very critical way. Whereas when he talks about his play, you can tell it really gives him joy. You can tell that this is a part of him that maybe he doesn't really get to explore as much as he'd like. And I think that's definitely, you know, one of the reflections that he has is at the end of the book. But it makes him feel, you know, very relatable. I think a lot of people feel like they're not doing what they really want to be doing, and I think Fulgentius definitely talks about that a lot in this book, and I kind of felt sorry for him. I wanted him to become the playwright that I think, you know, he could become because he's incredibly talented. The other thing that I really like about Fulgentius is how he talks about how he's this kind of very rational man, and he hates philosophy because philosophy is kind of in some ways the kind of antithesis of that. But it's funny because by the end of the book, he becomes a philosopher. He's talking about life. He's talking about what makes a good life, what makes a reasonable life. And that's ultimately philosophy. Philosophy is the exploration of knowledge and intellect. And by asking critical questions, you are inherently philosophizing. And I thought that was quite funny because he kind of looks down on philosophy, not because he thinks he's better than it. It's just because he's rational, and philosophy is rational, in my opinion. To be good at philosophizing, you have to be quite rational, but to some degree you also have to suspend your rationality as well when you're discussing philosophical works or texts or, you know, whatever it may be. That seems to be at odds with his personality, and yet he kind of embraces that inadvertently by the end of the book, which I just loved. There's a really interesting character in this book that goes by the name of Maximus, and he's a criminal. And that was actually one of my favorite parts of the book, was when Fulgentius and Maximus have kind of conversations and dialogue with each other. Maximus is this very kind of incredibly intelligent individual and he changes Fulgentius's view on education and intellect, and I think that's the kind of turning point for him where he becomes this kind of philosopher. I love that. I'm not going to say anything more about Maximus because otherwise it'd be a major spoiler, and I think you should experience it the way that I experienced it. And then the last thing that I will say on Fulgentius is that he wants to live a different life to the one that he ended up in. He ends up talking himself out of it because it's not what's expected of him. And I almost felt like by the end of the book, he was kind of destined to fit a cliche, and he kind of embraces that by the end of the book. And I just thought that that was kind of poetic in itself. I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to that. The other thing that I'm going to talk about is the thematic work. I think you'll probably get a sense of the thematic work based on what I've just said about the character of Fulgentius, but I think there's a lot of discussion about how the life that we live is not necessarily the life that we want, the kind of transience of time, how we waste away moments because of what we're expected to do rather than what we want to do, the kind of unimportance of material things, the simplicity and boringness of war, and how, you know, death and destruction are actually one of the kind of most rational kind of concepts that, you know, we could partake in almost, or acts that we could partake in. And I just loved everything about this book. It's a very bizarre book in ways, but I think it's very poetic, and it will make you think about yourself and make you think about other people in your life. And it's also quite funny. There's quite a lot of really like cutting humor in it. It's very similar to Parker's humor and Abercrombie's humor in a sense. And I just loved it. I just found myself laughing out loud multiple times. I thought that to be quite unexpected. I'm now going to read a few quotes from this book just so that you get a flavour. I actually tabbed loads of quotes that I wanted to read, but I am not going to read all of these because I would be basically reading the entire book, and we don't want to do that. Okay, this is the first one. I'll read 3, I think. The analogy was self-evident. Old age and youth. Fulgentius had once been that young river, all vitality and drive, preserving the child within, and the child between his legs who had grown along with him. Energy and the pleasure of spending it were blended in this metaphor. As the river was the image of life, the child who stood up on his own was the image of genitality. And in both cases, it was a joyful liquid emission that gave meaning to existence. This was all well and good, but there was also the other river with its moribund whispers to remind him that he was older than his parents and grandparents had been when they died, and that his military and social achievements could never make up for the white hair, the wrinkles, and the rheumatic aches. Thus, the allegory played itself out. It's so good. Second one. Learning the art of war was like training a dog. There was a system of patiently administered rewards and punishments, which gradually established mental parameters for appropriate and inappropriate behaviour. Except that a dog would learn in the end, if it wasn't too obtuse, while a soldier went on receiving rewards and punishments all his life, and if he started to rely on what he had learned, he was lost. Incredible. Okay, here's the last quote. Fulgentius came to the conclusion that this man had used intelligence as almost no one else had done, to find out more. It seemed the obvious thing to do, and yet it was vanishingly rare. The vast majority of those with a functioning mind were content simply to be so endowed. They were satisfied with its latent power and feared that activating it might lead to deterioration. They used it only when they had to for solving problems. Fulgentius had belonged to that silent majority, and the revelation that he had been granted was like the discovery of a continent. And there we have it. It's phenomenal. It's one of those books that will kind of take you on a little bit of a self-discovery journey, kind of inadvertently. You'll think about things in your life and pose some questions that I think need to be posed every now and then. So I obviously gave this a 5 stars. Obviously gave it a 5 stars. I'm definitely going to be checking out more of Cesar's books. I actually added a few to my wish list, so I'm very excited about that. But I don't think anyone has read this book yet. So if you have, definitely hit me down below and let me know. And if you haven't and you have any questions, also hit me down below. But I loved it, and I definitely think if you're a fan of KJ Parker, you will really enjoy this book. There's definitely some parallels in the kind of thematic work, but also the humor, the writing. I just ate it up. Thanks for watching, folks. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.